A satisfação de contar com o professor André Xavier, que é o primeiro tesoureiro da diretoria da Abralin e também professor do curso de Letras Libras aqui da Universidade Federal do Paraná. Então, a gente deseja que a palestra seja, que essa conferência seja bastante proveitosa para todo mundo.
So, good afternoon, everyone. It's my great pleasure to introduce Dr. Sherman Wilcox. Dr. Sherman Wilcox is a distinguished emeritus professor of linguistics in the Department of Linguistics at the University of New Mexico. He is worldwide known for his prominent research within cognitive linguistics on sign languages, gesture, and the evolution of language. He has studied and described several sign languages, namely American Sign Language, Italian Sign Language, Catalan Sign Language, Iranian Sign Language, Sweden-Finnish Sign Language, Argentine Sign Language, and Brazilian Sign Language, most commonly referred to as Libras. He's the author of a number of books and scholarly articles on linguistics, evolution of language, gesture, deaf culture, and sign language interpreting. Among the books he has published is Learning to See, co-authored with Dr. Phyllis Wilcox. As the title suggests, this book teaches the readers to see deaf people as a linguistic minority and their language and culture as rich, diverse, and complex. We Brazilians are very lucky to have this book translated into Portuguese by Dr. Tarcísio Leite from the Federal University of Santa Catarina, and made available for free download by Editora Arara Azul. Professor Sherman Wilcox has been to Brazil several times. The first time was for the Abralin Institute and Conference held in the University of Brasilia in 2005. Since then, Professor Wilcox has contributed tremendously with the development of sign linguistics in Brazil by supervising Brazilian students doing and publishing research on Libras. I was one of those Brazilian students who had the privilege and the honor to work with Professor Sherman Wilcox at his university when I was a PhD student. I owe him not only a strong training in cognitive linguistics, but also the happiest time of my academic career so far. Thank you, Sherman, for teaching me so much, for being such an inspiration to me as a linguist, as a professor, as a human being. Thank you very much for coming to Brazil and giving, especially to our deaf students, a precious opportunity to learn to see, directly from you, the beauty of sign language grammars through the lenses of cognitive grammar. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Professor Sherman Wilcox. The floor is all yours.
Do I need to use this? Okay, I need to use this. Okay. Andre, thank you for that lovely, lovely introduction. Andre is not only my best colleague, but he's my dearest friend also. And he's right that I first came to Brazil for Abralin in 2005 in Brasilia. However, I've been familiar with Brazil for 40 years before that, right? Because I'm a former musician. And I fell in love with the music of Brazil in 1965, which tells you a little bit about how old I am. And so I was, my entire life, I wanted to come to Brazil to hear the music live. Now that I've come back for my second Abralin, I have realized that not only am I in love with the music of Brazil, but I'm totally in love with Brazil. So this morning I'm going to talk to you. This morning, it's morning where I am. I don't know. This afternoon, this evening, I'm going to talk to you about making a list in Brazil. We're going to talk about list constructions in Libras and also list constructions in Portuguese. That is, how Portuguese hearing speakers make lists gesturally. First, I need just a very brief history of sign language linguistics. Sorry. As you all know, I'm sure, but to make sure we all do know this, sign languages are the natural languages of deaf people all over the world. They are natural, organic languages. They develop on their own. They are not created languages. They organically develop. For many years, for decades, for centuries, in fact, they were not considered to be languages. They were considered to be just gesture. This is many of you will recognize the name of the Milan Conference. This is from the man who organized the Milan Conference, Giulio Tarla. He says gesture is not the true language of man. Now, when he says gesture, he's referring to sign language, right? He's referring to sign language here. Gesture is not the true language of man, which suits the dignity of his nature. Gesture, instead of addressing the mind, addresses the imagination and the senses. That was not a compliment he was making. He was saying that sign language is merely gesture. That all changed in the 1960s when William C. Stokey at Gallaudet University, then Gallaudet College, recognized that the language that his deaf students were using was a language, right? And he wrote a study on this language, and he wrote a dictionary, which all of you who are studying Libras are familiar with this. With that publication of his research on American Sign Language, he really was the big bang of sign language linguistics all over the world. He created the universe of sign language linguistics. It is spread all over the world. People who do research on sign language linguistics know the name of William Stokey. I'm really only going to tell you a little tiny piece of that universe of sign language linguistics, how deaf people make, in Libras, make lists. So here we go. First, I'd like you to just watch this video. Okay, all the people in the audience who know Libras know exactly what's going on here. For those of you who don't, I assume there are people who don't. There are people who don't know Libras? Raise your hands. Okay, great. So well, he was making a list there, and we'll get to it. I want you to remember, if you can, what he did at the very end, and I'll show you real quickly here. I'm trying to do this while holding a microphone. He did 3 fingers. Okay, so what's going on here? Well, first, how do signers make lists? I mean, we all make lists, you know? We make a list saying, well, I'm going to put it on the refrigerator, say, you know, go to the store, go to the laundromat, go pick up my son from school. Or we make lists in spoken language. We say, I'm going to go to the movie, and then afterwards I'm going to go have some food, and then after that I'm going to go get some ice cream. And so we make a list intonationally. We make lists. Well, lists have been studied in a number of different sign languages. We have identified 3 types. Other researchers have identified 3 types: linear, spatial, and digital. Linear is just where you sign the list, as you do in speech, linearly, and perhaps add some sign language intonation, some prosody and intonation. Spatial is where you put the list items spatially. And digital is where you do it on the fingers, as Jefferson did right there, right? So lists have been described in the literature as buoys. This term came about because it was seen as a set of signs in which the non-dominant hand, this is kind of unique, that it's done with the non-dominant hand, is held in a stationary configuration while the dominant hand continues producing signs. It was noted that the buoy maintains a physical presence. It's held out there. That's why they use the term buoy. And because it maintains this physical presence, it guides the discourse by serving as a conceptual landmark. It's a visual landmark, but it's also a conceptual landmark. But there's a problem with this. Andre's student, Hanalji, has done very nice research on list buoys in Libras and has discovered that 68% of the Libras list buoys do not perseverate. That is, they do not maintain a physical presence. They drop. They're a buoy, but they're not a very good buoy because they drop down, okay? So something is wrong here. Something more important, I feel, is wrong. None of the descriptions of lists as list buoys talk about the dominant hand. The hand that's doing the pointing. When you saw Jefferson pointing, yes, he had the list buoy out there, but he's also pointing. None of the descriptions talk about that pointing hand. If they do, for example, here from Scott Liddell, he says that the pointing hand is a meaningful gesture pointing to things that the signer will talk about rather than a fixed lexical item. In other words, he's distinguishing between the language, a fixed lexical item, the list buoy, and a gesture. And I and many others are not satisfied with that description. We don't think that this is just a gesture that's accompanying a sign. We think the whole thing is Libras. So, in doing this analysis, Andre and I and a colleague in Finland who worked on Finland-Swedish Sign Language, her name is Satu Sitalopi, sorry. We adopt a constructional approach based on cognitive grammar. In this approach, we assume that there are two linguistic components. There's the dominant pointing hand, that's one of the linguistic components, and then there's a non-dominant finger, locations. Right? We're pointing to locations on the finger. And both of these components are comprised of form and meaning. To do this work for the Brazilian portion of it, we used videos from Facebook, YouTube, conversational data on Zoom and WhatsApp. You can see the complete list of our data in this article in Language and Cognition, published this year. Prior to this research, Hanalji, Andre's student, had done work on Libras, as I mentioned, and has discovered that there is a typology of list constructions. And let me briefly go through this. So, and I'm going to try again with, I'm going to put the microphone down for a little bit. I will yell. There's fixed. Fixed means the fingers that are involved in the list are all there. They're fixed. Next one over is sequential. Sequential means you build the list. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. You build the list sequentially at a time. And then there's a mixed version of that, okay? Below that, we have perseverated and non-perseverated. Perseverated just means that that list hand's perfect. That's, yay. Now I can sign. Perseverated just means that the list hand stays there. And non-perseverated means that it comes up and down for whatever reason. We'll see why. So here's an example of fixed with perseveration. It's not a video. You can see what she's doing. She says, it was always my dream to work in Curitiba, but I couldn't do this when I was 15, 16, 17, or even 18 years old. There's the list, 15, 16, 17, or 18. And she does this with a fixed construction. She holds, all the fingers are out there. It's perseverated. She never drops her hand. And with her dominant hand, she signs 15, I'm not going to do it in Libras, but I'll do it in ASL, 15, 16, 17, 18. All right, so she can sign 15, 16, 17, 18 with one hand and maintain this other hand there. Here's fixed without perseveration. Jefferson is saying, the first class that we're going to talk about is, then he has to tell you what it is, text genre. In order to sign text genre, he has to use both hands. So there's no perseveration. He uses both hands to sign what it's about. And then he brings it up, it's fixed. So he still has the fixed in place. And he signs sign writing, drops the hand, and he does it again. Okay, you get the point here. They're sequentially built with perseveration. This woman, I have to tell you that this is not Libras. This is a woman from Finland, Swedish Sign Language showing this. So this is sequentially built. She says, the first thing is on Sunday, April 14th, and then she tells you what we're going to do. But she can tell you that with one hand. And then the second thing in the list is Sunday, the 26th of May, and she can do that with one hand also. So it has perseveration, but it's sequentially built. And then finally, we get sequentially built without perseveration, where she says, first, there's going to be a grill party, but then she goes on to explain what this grill party is all about, and she needs both hands to do that. So she doesn't perseverate the list, but she brings it back up and sequentially adds the second list explains that it's a church get-together and here's what we're going to do, brings the hand. Okay, you get the point. Here's an example of how what happened in that video. So Jefferson first signed a fixed list and pointed to all 3 items. Then he did a sequential list, and he said the first thing was text, the second thing was, the second item in the list was literature, and the third item in the list was signed writing. And you see in that third item in the list, it was not, and all of the items in that list, it's not perseverated, right? Because he had to use his other hand to describe what the list was about. And here it is again. I'm sorry, I'm going to start that video again because I did not let the interpreter finish. Okay, so just a tiny little piece of the theoretical framework that we use to analyze this. It's called cognitive grammar. In cognitive grammar, a very basic assumption is that there are 3 types of structures. Really, it's a very conservative approach to linguistics, right? There's only 3 types of structures. There are semantic structures, which are conceptualizations that are used for linguistic purposes. There are phonological structures. These are the expressive elements of languages. So sounds, the expressive elements of sign language, gestures, orthographic representation. The basic essential feature of the phonological structure is that it's able to be perceived, of course, right? It's how we share information. And there are pairings of these with a phonological structure and a semantic structure. There are pairings between semantic and phonological structures. A little bit of complexity. Symbolic structures themselves, the pairing, can vary in terms of complexity and in degree of specificity and schematicity. How specifically something is phonologically and semantically, or how schematic something is phonologically and semantically. A little bit more complexity. We can take these symbolic assemblies and combine them and form complex symbolic assemblies, combinations of symbolic assemblies. For the purposes of cognitive grammar, what we assume is that grammatical patterns themselves, grammar, resides in complex symbolic assemblies that are partially or wholly schematic in various complex ways. So all of grammar, all of lexicon, all of grammar, all of syntax is merely complex symbolic assemblies, and we call those constructions. So one of our basic points of our research is that list constructions are pointing constructions, okay? List constructions are pointing constructions. So in order to talk about this, I have to do a little bit of work on what is a pointing construction for us in our analysis, in a cognitive grammar analysis. To do this, I really love this old Chinese proverb. When the wise man points at the moon, the fool looks at the finger. It really says it all for me. When the wise man points at the moon, the fool looks at the finger. The point of pointing to the moon is not to look at your finger, it's to look at the moon. But clearly there are 2 components going on here, right? And the fool gets them mixed up. 2 components go on. The thing that we are looking at, the moon in this case, and the thing that we use to direct your attention to the moon. 2 components, the thing that we are trying to focus your attention on, and the thing, which I call a device, actually I call it a pointing device, that is used to focus your attention on that other thing. Okay, so both of those elements, the pointing device, the other thing that I want you to focus attention on, I call it a place. Now, you have to be careful. You notice I capitalized place here because it's a symbolic structure. It has a form and a meaning. And place is the name of that whole structure. It's the whole structure. So the pointing device and the place are both symbolic structures. They both have form and meaning. Form and meaning of the pointing device, form and meaning of this thing called place. The form of the pointing device in that example is the finger. But as the deaf students in my class quickly pointed out, there are many other kinds of pointing devices in sign languages, right? I can point with my eyes. I can point with my body orientation. In New Mexico, where I come from, the Native American culture, Navajo, Dene, they point with their mouth. D-I-N-E, Dene. So there are many different kinds of pointing devices. Tongue, you can point with your tongue. Yes. With your chin. Yes. The prototypical pointing device in list constructions of course, is the pointing finger. So what's the meaning? That's the phonological form. That's the form. What's the meaning? Well, basically, for now, I want to say schematically, it's direct your attention to this, right? And this is schematic. We don't know what this is. Direct your attention to something. The something that I want you to direct your attention to is the place. So what is the place? Well, the place is a symbolic structure itself, and its form is a location in space. That's why you have to be careful with the term place. You can get them confused. It's why I capitalize place. The form of a place is a location in space. And its meaning, well, its meaning is schematic. It can be used for all kinds of different locations and all kinds of different things. So it's a very schematic meaning until it's actually used in a specific expression. Its meaning is a grouping conceived as a single entity, which in cognitive grammar we use this highly technical term we call thing. But it's a technical term, thing. It's very often a nominal, of course. A nominal. Thing. Yeah. So, as a diagram, here's what it looks like. We have a meaning and a form, a semantic pole and a phonological pole. The pointing device, semantic pole, is direct your attention. That's what it means. That's its function. Its form, well, I put the ellipses there because it can have so many different forms. Prototypically, the pointing finger. The place is a symbolic structure. Its form is a location in space. Yes, highly schematic. We have to, only in use, in an expression, is that made specific. And its meaning, again, is highly schematic. Only in use is it made specific. So it's schematically, we call it thing. Okay. So sign language lists are pointing constructions, is our claim. The pointing finger is the pointing device. The list hand, the non-dominant hand, fingers are places. Each one of those has a semantic, a phonological pole. There it is right there. And a semantic pole. Well, we have to know what the semantic pole is because it's, at first, very schematic. So what's the function of places then? Well, one of the functions is, well, they have several functions, sorry. They can be used as nominal reference and referent tracking, right? So he talked about text genre, sign writing, whatever that third one was, which I forget now, deaf culture maybe, right? And then we can track that. So when he comes back to point to his first finger, we know it's text genre, and we track it as referentially. Lists can be used in topic comment constructions, and they can be used in antecedent anaphor constructions as well, right? The list itself. So I'm going to show you an extended example. I'm going to give the analysis first here. Marcelo, where's Marcelo? Marcelo is right there. Marcelo is going to tell us about how you apply for a position. He's going to say that there's going to be an evaluation, and there are two components of the evaluation. On the first one, you have to turn in your Laches CV, and it's going to be scored by different people, and then those different scores are going to be summarized into one. Okay? That's what he's going to tell us. So here's what it looks like. First, he says, how are you going to be evaluated? How are you going to be tested? You're going to have, it's going to have two components. Then he does the first list construction, the first component. So he points to the first list item, right? And he marks it as a topic. It's marked as a topic facially. Now, we already know that we now know what the location is, of course, of the place, but we don't know what the place semantically, we don't know the meaning of this first element. So that's what happens in the next three screenshots there. We know the first place, we know what that first list, we know we have a first list item, we don't know what it is. And so now he tells us what it is. Laches, your CV. It's your Laches CV. He then points to the first list item again, right? this time with a different facial expression, right? And Andre and I have glossed this facial expression as intersubjective alignment. I think what this means is we have identified the topic, the first list item. I've told you what it is. Are we on the same page here, right? We both agree that we know what this list item is? Yeah? Okay, then I can go on. So in the first screenshot in the bottom row, he maintains the list. It perseverates, but he drops his hand. It doesn't look like he drops it, but that was the best screenshot I could get. And then he goes on to once again point to the first list item with a different facial expression here, a much more kind of neutral facial expression. And he says, first list item, it will be summarized. So what we have is in the first image in the second row is a topic explaining what that topic is. It's your Lachus CV, and then in the bottom row, in the point again, and then say it will be summarized. The first A. Sorry, let me just stand up and do this. So here we have it marked as a topic. We tell you what it is. Here we have the comment. The topic and the comment. This functions as what we would call a pivot, right? So a pivot and a topic comment. And a typical, a parade example, an example of topic comment that would be given in a textbook, it would be something like, as for elephants, they have long trunks. The topic is elephants, and the pivot is they. Elephants, they. And that's what, so it's an anaphor-antecedent relationship, really, right? And that's what's going on here. The topic and the pivot. This is an anaphor to that. Okay? You want to see it? It's amazing how much information can be compacted into just a little bit of time. So here's the analysis. As soon as sorry. Got it? When I was preparing this video, it's a much longer video. When I was preparing the excerpt, I thought, no, I haven't got the right one. It's too short. I haven't got the whole thing. And I realized, oh no, that is the whole thing right there. Okay, what's the function of the pointing device? Let's come back to the dominant hand, which was ignored for such a long period of time, called a gesture. Well, we already saw that the dominant hand is this pointing device which serves to direct attention to something. It also can group fingers. So it profiles the individual list fingers. It can group them and create a single higher level of conceptual organization. It can group things, and as the group, it now moves to a higher order of conceptual organization, a higher order entity. You saw that in the first video that I showed, where he said we have 3 individual items here, the 3 individual classes, but when he does this, we're talking about them still, in my diagram here, it's meant to say, he has created a grouping here. In English, it would be these, right? But still, the individual elements of the group are still pretty forward in your conceptualization. When he does this, however, he moves it over to here, where he has now created a grouping which is much more pushed forward in your conceptualization. The individual elements are still there, but much more forward in your conceptualization is the higher order group. Libras signers do this all the time. So they use this kind of phonological fusion of the fingers in various ways. They can pointing rapidly in succession. Marcelo did that at the very beginning of that video. He did this, pointing rapidly in succession, pointing to 2 fingers simultaneously. How do you point to 2 fingers simultaneously? Let's see. So here's Jefferson again. He's saying that there are 2 things that are important. First is the candidate for state legislature, Second is the candidate for federal legislature. And these two candidates, now we've grouped, these two candidates are the most important. Sorry. Rapid succession. Simultaneous appointing. Did you see it? Rapid succession, then pointing second list item. Simultaneous pointing to two items to create this higher order entity. We see all kinds of things, so we don't have time to show you all the different ways that the dominant pointing hand can do this. It does it by circling. It does it by swiping path movements of various types. I want to give one last example from the Libras portion of this talk. It's a beautiful example, again by Jefferson. A little bit more close. Yeah, I'm calling it the tattoo. Jefferson is going to say, what does this tattoo depict? There are four people. There's two female birds wearing a bow, and they represent my wife and my daughter. There are two other birds which don't have any bows, and they represent me and my stepson. And the four of us make a family. In this video, I'm not going to do an analysis of this video. You now know what it says, and you know what these various processes are, these various mechanisms that deaf people have in Libras to do the kinds of things I've talked about. See if you can spot them. I don't know about you, but I think this is beautiful. Did you see everything going on there? Swiping, double pointing, grouping, amazing. You want to see it again? We have time. Let's see it again. Swiping, gluing. Double pointing. Swipe, path movement. This thing. Okay. And of course, what he's doing here is that he's doing this beautiful, iconic presentation of his family as represented by the tattoo, right? Like this. There's something a little cool going on here also. In a list construction in sign languages, often, not always, but often, there's a certain ordering implied by the fingers, right? If I were going to list my family, me and my family, in ASL, I probably would put me, and for four things I do this in ASL, I guess you guys do too. I would probably put me as the big finger, right? And my wife as the middle finger, and my oldest child as this ring finger, and my youngest child as the pinky finger. He doesn't do this. He got a different ordering in there. Why? It's because of the tattoo, right? The tattoo has two people with bows and two people without bows, right? And that's how he has to then organize his list. So it iconically matches the tattoo. It's really amazing. Okay, I'm not going to do the conclusions. You know what we talked about. Let's move on. Take a break for me. We're going to move on to lists in Brazilian Portuguese. So what I mean here is Andre and I have started collecting data from Brazilian Portuguese speakers as they talk about various things, 5 ways to have a happy marriage, something like that, right? And they gesture while they talk about that. So we're going to look at what we find. We have analyzed about more than 9 hours of video now, about 66, we have a little bit more now, list constructions in spoken Portuguese. Okay, one of the things I want to let you know is that we find very much the same kinds of things going on. So watch here, and for those of you who speak Portuguese, listen to what he's talking about. This is Haddad, I guess an academic from USP. and a politician. I hope the sound is okay. The first time I tried this, it blasted us out.
Todo mundo já ouviu falar da máfia do ISS, 500 milhões desviados, com participação de gente graúda, todos presos ou condenados, já devidamente pela justiça. Todo mundo já ouviu falar da Controlar, que era um papa-níquel, que cobrava dos paulistanos por uma inspeção que não era sequer feita com qualidade. Acabei com o contrato. Todo mundo ouviu falar do cartel de empreiteiras do túnel Roberto Marinho. Suspendi a obra com 42 dias de governo.
So what did you see? I mean, he's doing a list construction. He's starting with his thumb. It's a sequentially built list construction. I couldn't tell if he was going to perseverate or not. He kind of perseverated, and then when he did the third finger, he kind of didn't perseverate. He kind of let go of it, right? Okay. So we have at least sequentially built, partially perseverated, maybe not totally perseverated. Yes, okay. We see other kinds of forms of this a little bit. There's a little bit more variation in hearing speakers.
Crimes patrimoniais explodiram. Roubo de celular, roubo de moto, roubo de veículo, explodiram no Estado.
Wait a minute. What happened? What happened? He started with his pinky finger. He started with his pinky finger. Look again at this one.
Na organização criminosa que alicia e que recepta os bens roubados.
A little bit different orientation of the hand, but again, he started with his pinky finger. You didn't see any of that in the Libras. In our data so far of list hand fingers of hearing Portuguese speakers doing list constructions, 77% of the time, they start with their pinky finger. I'd like to be able to give you the data on that for Libras list constructions, but we didn't even collect it because we didn't even think about collecting it because it's never done. It's like we didn't even think about collecting this. It's something that's never done. It's 99.9% start with up here. 0.01 start down at the pinky finger. It's just 77% of hearing people do this. Look, this makes it clear what the two different conventions. Adaji starts with his pinky finger. The Libras interpreter for the same list item starts with it. Of course, convention says no, you start with your index finger to do that. It is such a convention to start with your pinky finger that you start with a pinky finger even if you don't have a pinky. So guess where Lula starts?
Primeiro, nós reduzimos da inflação
With his ring finger.
Sabe que era 4,5 mais 2 menos 2 durante todo o meu período de governo. Segundo.
And he does a fixed list construction starting with his so-called pinky finger. Okay, I want to give an extended example here, and I am going to do the analysis of this extended example. It's a very cool example. I'm going to first just show the entire example. I'm sorry, I don't have it translated. It's, of course, in Portuguese, and if you don't speak Portuguese, you're in the same boat I am, because I don't understand what he's saying either. But I've done the analysis enough that I know what's going on here. So here's the example.
Tem 4 tipos de empresários. Tem o pseudo-empresário, tem o empresário iludido, tem o empresidiário e tem o empresário de verdade, é o governante. O pseudo-empresário é o seguinte, ele tem uma empresa, ele tem um CNPJ, ele sai todos os dias para trabalhar na empresa dele, só que ele não é empresário, ele é funcionário da própria empresa. Ele é o melhor funcionário da empresa com o pior emprego do mundo. Melhor por quê? Porque esse cara faz tudo depende dele, ele é o mais competente, ele é o centralizador. Mas esse cara não tem resultados, ele não forma uma equipe, ele não cresce, a empresa não avança.
Okay, got it? Did you see the list construction is going on there? Okay, so here's what he's talking about. He says, first of all, there are 4 types of entrepreneurs. And he does this, it was very fast. I'm going to show you this portion of the clip again, but it's very fast right here. There's a fast swipe of a fixed list. So he says there's 4 types with a fast swipe, and such at the very beginning of the video, you can barely catch it. Then he does the list, and of course he does it pinky first, right? There's a pseudo-entrepreneur, a deluded entrepreneur, an imprisoned entrepreneur, and for whatever reason, I don't know, for the fourth one, the true entrepreneur, he uses a thumb point. He doesn't use a list construction. Okay? So watch again, here it is.
Tem 4 tipos de empresários. Tem o pseudo-empresário, tem o empresário iludido, tem o empresidiário e tem o empresário de verdade, é o governante.
Okay? He then goes on to say, and I don't have a video for this, he's just saying what's going on here. He describes this pseudo-entrepreneur. He says the pseudo-entrepreneur is somebody who has a company, he has a CNPJ, a company ID, he goes to work every day at this company, but he's not really an entrepreneur because he's a worker in his own company, kind of. He does so much work, he's just like a worker in his own company. He describes all that in speech, in Portuguese. Then he does a list construction. He says he's the best employee in his company with the worst job in the world. Okay? He's the best employee in the company, pinky, with the worst job in the world, ring finger. So we've now got a list construction with him as the pinky.
Ele é o melhor funcionário da empresa com o pior emprego do mundo.
Okay? Why is he the best employee? Remember where he was as the best employee? Pinky. He says, because this guy does everything, pinky. Everything depends on him. Now he does, for the rest of this, he does a series of points and a representational gesture. He says, because everything depends on him, some points. He's the most important, another point, and he's the center of everything, a representational gesture, not part of the list construction.
Melhor por quê? Porque esse cara faz tudo, tudo depende dele, ele é o mais competente, ele é o centralizador.
So esse cara, this is the guy, right? Now he does a sub-list. This is the guy, but the characteristics of this guy is that he has no results and he can't form a team. So we're still talking about this guy and the sub-characteristics, the characteristics of this guy. How is he going to distinguish between this guy and the characteristics of this guy? I mean, you'd think he could do a different list construction, but he doesn't. He still uses his pinky for all of this. He says this guy, but then he does a hyper extension of this guy for his characteristic, and another hyper extension of this guy for his other characteristic. It has no results and he can't form a team. Then he says he can't grow with a thumb point, and his company doesn't advance with a representational gesture of advancing.
Mas esse cara não tem resultados, ele não forma uma equipe, ele não cresce, a empresa não avança.
Did you see it? I didn't. I'm going to look again.
Mas esse cara não tem resultados, ele não forma uma equipe, ele não cresce, a empresa não avança.
So he does that hyperextension for the sub-list. Okay, that's actually the end of that excerpt. It was a 30-second excerpt. It's a 30-second excerpt of a 3-minute video of this guy talking about these entrepreneurs. We only did the pseudo-entrepreneur, right? And the whole rest of this video, you can see, it's just full of list constructions of various types using list fingers. So, excuse me. So we have some qualitative differences, of course, between Brazilian Portuguese gestured lists and Libras. In Libras, it's all the sign modality. It all is the modality that's used for the language. In Brazilian Portuguese, well, there's sort of this division of labor, that part of the stuff is done gesturally, part of the stuff is done in spoken Portuguese, of course. In Libras, index first is highly conventional, index or thumb first. It's so highly conventional, we didn't think about anything else. And in Brazilian Portuguese, pinky first you saw is the more conventional, 77%. But thumb and index first do appear. You saw it in adagi. And the elaboration telling us what this finger means, in my terms telling us what is the elaboration of the semantic pole of the place construction, is done with manual signs. That's why we have to drop the hand sometimes, because in order to tell what this place is, what this finger means, I have to use both hands. In Brazilian Portuguese, the elaboration of each finger is done mostly by speech, of course. I mean, they're not going to elaborate it with gestures. The gestures are not able to provide enough content to say what these things are. And there are some amazing similarities. I mean, first of all, we use what I would, in cognitive grammar, my analysis, I would say they both use these places and these pointing devices. We see both fixed and sequentially built constructions. We see both with and without perseveration, and although we have not yet done enough of the analysis, I'm sure the conceptual and information structure and discourse structure and significance of fixed and perseverated and not perseverated will become clear. So we see a number of similarities. Now, let me take a drink of water, because I want to say, what's going on here? What's going on here? At the beginning of this lecture, I said, for centuries, people said sign language was gesture, and Bill Stokoe blew that up and created the cosmos by saying, no, that's not gesture. And now I just showed you a bunch of data of people who are speaking Portuguese and clearly gesturing, and it all looks pretty similar, doesn't it? It looks pretty similar. So what's going on? Hearing people are not using sign language. Are deaf people using gesture? There are people who say this. Many sign linguists now are analyzing agreement verbs as fusions of signs and pointing gestures, right? They're saying that there are certain sign constructions, actually constructions that are core constructions in the language, core parts of the language, that are combinations, fusions of language and not language, of sign and gesture. This quote is from somebody who doesn't actually believe that, doesn't really support that, but she makes it very clear what's going on here, so I'm putting it in here. She says, agreement verbs move between spatial locations associated with reference, and since there's an infinite number of possible points, the forms of these verbs are unlistable. It's infinite. And therefore, they're just gestural indications of the reference. Some people call these indicating verbs because they just gesturally indicate the referent. The argument goes that if the locations in space that are used for indexic and referential pointing are not listable, if they are infinite, not listable, they can't be part of the grammar, and therefore must be external to it, that is part of grammar, part of gesture. We can't have an infinite number of elements in a grammar. So says dogma, linguistic dogma. Now, I don't believe this, as a matter of fact. Adam Kindon we lost Adam Kindon a few months ago. He passed away. Adam Kindon was widely recognized as the world's expert on gesture. And he knew a hell of a lot about sign language, as a matter of fact. And one of the last things that he wrote, I love this quote. He says, gesture is so muddied with ambiguity and theoretical and ideological baggage that its use in scientific discourse impedes our ability to think clearly about how kinesic resources are used in utterance production, and interferes with clarity when comparing signers and speakers. I absolutely agree with Adam on this. This led me to think about this passage from Clifford Geertz, a cultural anthropologist. He writes, consider two boys rapidly contracting the eyelids of their right eyes. In one, this is an involuntary twitch. In the other, it's a conspiratorial signal to a friend. The two movements are, as movements, identical. From when I am a camera, phenomenalistic observation of them alone, one could not tell which one was a twitch and which was a wink. Contracting your eyelids on purpose when there exists a public code in which doing so counts as a conspiratorial signal is winking. That's all there is to it. A speck of behavior, a fleck of culture, and voila, gesture. The key word here for me is in which doing so counts as a conspiratorial gesture. There's nothing out there in the observation of the data alone, in the observation of something alone, that tells us which is which. It's which one counts as knocking the microphone over. Right? This is a very important point for me. There's nothing, he said, it's an eye of a camera. You can't, there's nothing out there that you can observe that will tell you which one is which. It's which one counts as a gesture and which one, for him, counts as a twitch. Now, we have to figure out which one counts as a gesture and which one counts as a sign. A little bit different question. But that quote then also led me to this quote. It made me think about this. I like this quote also. This is from William Sturtevant, another cultural anthropologist. And there's a key here for me that we've gone from linguistics to anthropology. And I think it's an important step. Going from science, the science of observing of that piece of data objectively, to ethnoscience. Sturtevant says culture is the sum of a given society's folk classifications, all of that society's ethnoscience. Thus, to take an extreme example, the ethnopornography of the Queensland Aborigines is what they consider pornographic, if they even have such a category, rather than what was considered pornography by the Victorian ethnologist who studied them, right? If they even have such a category. And again, for me, the important word here is what was considered pornography by them. What was considered, right? It's not that I can identify it by just looking at it. It's what I consider to be pornographic, which then reminded me of this famous United States Supreme Court case of 1964. It was a Supreme Court case brought to determine what is pornography, what is obscenity. And of course, because it's a court case, they have to define what is pornography, what is obscene. And the Supreme Court Justice Potter Stewart, when he was asked to describe his test for obscenity, he said, "I can't define it, but I know it when I see it." I think this is what's going on with sign and gesture. And as a matter of fact, I think as a result, I want to say that gesture is the pornography of sign language linguistics. I don't know what it is, but I know it when I see it. Well, yeah, I know it when I see it, but you know it when you see it. And you don't see it as a gesture, you see it as something else, right? And so just because I see it as a gesture, who cares? So I think the use of this concept gesture, I agree with Adam Kindon, in scientific discourse, impedes our ability to think clearly because it's ill-defined. Gesture is not something that's objectively identifiable by observation alone. Language, gesture, sign, these are all historical cultural constructs, folk classifications. And whether hearing deaf people or deaf people share the same classifications of what counts as a sign and what counts as a gesture, if deaf communities even have such notions of what counts as a sign and what counts as a gesture, it's an important and open question. And we're beginning to answer this question, as a matter of fact. So some recent research done by Annelies Koesters in Mumbai concludes this. Everyday ideologies of deaf people in Mumbai showed either an analytic collapse of gesture and sign or a distinction between them, and they were more focused on, the deaf people were more focused on hearing status and other contextual factors in deciding whether something counted as gesture or sign, as compared to academic ideologies which were more focused on form, on measuring something identifiable out there. I think this is the answer to our question. The answer to our question is we're asking the wrong question. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sherman, for this wonderful talk. So I think we have time for questions now. Since it's very much em português, os nossos intérpretes já têm algo que para agradecer imensamente pela fala do Sherman acessível em Libras. Eles poderão também fazer a tradução do português, por favor, fiquem à vontade para fazer a pergunta em inglês, português ou Libras.
Time for pizza.
Boa noite. Ai, agora saiu alto. Eu fiquei pensando na apresentação do professor, né, e quando ele coloca, né, a diferença das línguas, né, e principalmente pensando na Libras. A Libras, para nós, é chamada língua brasileira de sinais, né? Então, quando a gente pensa na similaridade, né, do falante e do surdo, né, ao se expressar, e como ele falou, né, ele colocou ali a língua, os gestos, os sinais são construções histórico-culturais, né? Então, eu queria saber, então, na realidade, fiquei pensando, né, se a gente já chamou de língua brasileira de sinais, onde que poderia ter a diferença, por exemplo, dos falantes, né, pensando nesse sentido, com surdos, né? Eu penso que seria impossível ter muitas diferenças, além da questão da construção histórico-cultural. Obrigada.
To the extent that I understand your question, I think this part of your question involved the incorporation. It seems to me incorporation of gesture into sign languages, and that certainly happens. It certainly is the case. I think that gestures that are in common use in whatever community can become incorporated into a sign language. Right? Actually, some beautiful work is being done right now by Andre and Marcelo, the famous Marcelo, who you saw up here, on emblems that are incorporated. So, a very common one that we all know is that a hearing gesture is this, right? We use, you use this all the time. It's hearing people, and we know what it means. And it has been incorporated into Libras as various forms. One of the fun things I did with this gesture for ASL is, among my deaf friends, I said, is this a gesture or a sign? And their immediate reaction was, oh, it's a gesture. And then I said, well, okay, so what happens if you, no, actually, let me back up a little bit. I said, when a deaf person is at a McDonald's, for example, and he goes up to order a hamburger from a hearing person, of course, and they have their little interaction, and the deaf person does this. Is that a gesture or a sign? His initial reaction was it's a gesture, because he's not signing ASL to a hearing person working at McDonald's. It's a gesture made for the for the hearing person. And I said, well, okay, so what if you go back to your table to eat your hamburger with all your deaf friends, and you all get done and say, okay, cool, we'll meet next week. And you could see his head kind of go, is that a gesture or a sign? He was like, it's a sign. Right? Well, you just told me it was a gesture. So, yeah. So, so I don't know. I think that's an answer to part of your question. I don't know if it's the answer to the entire question.
So my name is Miriam, and I'm a linguist. So you explained it about the laces, right? The lace constructions, the sequential. So I was wondering about this author that you, Liddell, like 2013, his publication about and the pointer. So is it related to this of the list? There's a relation. So for example, when you do this term sign that you use to show the verbal balance, it's a subject, the verb and the object. When I use this form and you get back to the place where it was located, is it a form of indicating as well, like pointing?
Well,
you know this one, SVO. They do like this.
Did I do that?
No, they
Oh,
do
she
that.
did. Okay. Oh.
Yeah.
Oh. Okay. Well, first of all, oh wow, cool question. You tell me. You really think that's a gesture? Come on. Come on. You're signing pretty darn good Libras there. Okay, so there's two things I want to comment on that. First of all, these terms that I'm giving you, my analysis is based in cognitive grammar, which is a fully formed theory that's been out there since 1987. The first publication of cognitive grammar was in 1987. Totally fully formed theory that people all over the world use to analyze spoken languages. More and more people are using it to analyze spoken languages. Okay. The terms that I used are my own terms. So they are based in cognitive grammar, but they are my additions to cognitive grammar in order to account for certain things that go on in sign languages, right? So pointing device, place, those are my creations. But I firmly believe that they are grounded in cognitive grammar. Those are not Scott Liddell's terms, right? So he also uses cognitive grammar. He uses a mental space theory in that 2003 book I think you're referring to. But those are not his terms. I need more water, sorry. The second question. I would absolutely analyze it the way I've analyzed lists here. I wouldn't say it's, I don't think I'd say it was a list. No, you can tell me if I'm wrong, but my initial reaction is that it's not. So if I understand, which is the head orientation? So SVO. SVO. I don't think I would want to analyze this as a list, but I definitely would want to analyze this and this and this as my place constructions. Absolutely. The form is right there. The semantic pole, well, the semantic pole of that place is schematic until you put a finger-spelled S there, which has its own detailed analysis that we have to go through, right, to know that S is metonymically related to subject. It's only the first part of the finger-spelled word subject. And O, a V, this is a place also. Phonologically, it's right here. Semantically, it's the verb. Once again, V is metonymically related to the full form verb, right? Full finger-spelled form verb. And O. So yes, I would want to use my place construction, and I would want to say in the class we talked about placing. For those of you who are in the class, we talked about placing signs. You are placing the S, the finger-spelled S. You're placing S there and creating a link between this S and this place. And you're creating a link between V in this place and O in this place. Sorry. So from there on out, all I have to do is this, and you know I'm talking about V. And if I do this, you know I'm talking about SVO languages, and if I do this, you know I'm talking about OVS languages. Yeah. What a great question. Thank you.
So, for example, if I direct this, if I do like a sign, and then I look at the sign and say, I don't understand it. Like I'm holding a mobile phone, for example.
Would you like to come to New Mexico and we could do this research for about a year? Well, I mean, once again, what an amazing question. So sign, and you hold it out there, and then you look at it, and you say, I don't understand it.
So you ask someone, did you understand it?
And you probably do some pointing there too, right? I mean, so you're pointing with your eyes. Yes, exactly. Yes. So you are pointing. You're pointing with your eyes. Yeah. Yeah. Well, I don't know that I want to attempt an analysis on the spot here after 1 hour. But you know where the analysis, I know where the analysis I would want it to go. You can see where I would want it to go too. Yes, I would say that you are holding that sign there and in a way doing a placing of that sign, and you are using your eyes to direct attention to that. So your eyes are a pointing device. They're saying direct attention to this. Yeah, and then there's much more analysis to be done there, yeah. It's beautiful.
I have a bit of this in my PhD dissertation already.
It's beautiful. It's beautiful.
So, one question, I would like to thank you a lot for this amazing lecture, because I've traveled for a lot of conferences here in Brazil, and it's like it's always been the same. So it has been very fresh for us, like people who are like very stuck to generativism, so people who are really stuck to this stuff, you know, so and always this controversy of like these two poles fighting against each other, so in every place we go. So I like the quotation that you showed, very remarkable. Like, I'm in a group of deaf people. I'm like, of course, no problems for them, whether it's a gesture or it's a sign, right? But for hearing people, so maybe people are wanting to separate things that don't need to be separated. What if they are integrated? What if they, so in the quote you showed, it's like, what is to be considered pornographic, right? So a lot of years we have think from the perspective of the spoken languages. So thank you a lot for bringing sign language for this audience and for this audience of linguists. We really need to learn, and we don't want to learn the same. We want to learn new things. So thank you a lot for giving us this perspective.
I want to reply to two things for you. Let me remember what they are.
About the new things or
generative, yeah, and the last part here was
the quotation of pornography.
Okay. So the second part first. Of course, all of our thinking is based on what we say is language, right? So much so that we don't even stop to think about it. It's just centuries of dogma say this is what language is. But what language is, unquestioned, is a biased data set. We have decided, it's not even a decision, we have just absorbed what language is through a biased data set. We've only looked at spoken language, right? It'd be like if I know what human behavior is like because I studied 1,000 male freshman university students. No, that's a biased data set. You can't go from that. No, and so yeah, I think we know certain things that a dogma would tell us is language. One is that it has to have sound. That was the initial thing. This can't be language. It doesn't have any sound. When sign linguists started talking about sign language phonology, still, as a matter of fact, just last year I got called on the carpet for this. You can't call that phonology. There's no sound to it. It's the same stuff. I'm sorry. It's the same stuff. So some of that is clear to us, that we've got to combat these problems. Some of it, I think, is not clear to us. It is so built into the system that we don't even recognize it. That if we had started by looking at only sign languages, had no clue that spoken languages existed, I don't know that we would be at the same point we are right now, in what language can and cannot do. This whole business, about, an infinite number of locations in space. The whole point about using locations in space, spoken languages don't use locations in space in the same relevant way, right? If I say cat, they don't have two different meanings because I use two locations in space. In sign languages, those might very well have two different meanings. Okay, I've gone on enough about that. You get my point. We need to take and throw all of that out of our head, and I think it's very difficult. Here's one example. I think we need to throw out, never mind, I don't want to do it, never mind. Shut up, Sherman. The first one about, we have our battles, don't we, between cognitive linguists and generative linguists. And the cognitive linguists say, you guys are crazy. And the generative linguists say, you guys don't even know what the hell you're talking about, there are other fields of science. Like, I love watching YouTube videos and reading books for the lay person about quantum mechanics. I love it. I love reading about it. I love seeing how quantum physicists think. I don't understand a thing that they're talking about, but I love seeing how they think, right? And one of the things the really good people say is, look, we have a theory that is really exquisitely, remarkably able to account for the data, but yet we have 5, 6, 12 different interpretations, and sometimes they are actually called interpretations. They're not interpretations, they're just different theories. They're theories that say that it's an epistemic relationship between the data and my mind. Another theory says, well, there's a pilot wave theory that moves the electrons around. There's another one, the many worlds theory, that says in a certain observation, many worlds are created. They're totally different theories. And a good physicist tries to know as much as he can about each one of those, because one theory will make a certain prediction that another theory may not make, right? And at this point, we can't tell which one's right or wrong necessarily, but one will make a different prediction which might lead to a certain kind of thing within certain. Yeah. So we need multiple theories when we don't yet, or when we're not yet able to account fully for what's going on. And then we need pizza. Oh no. Okay. Oh.
I think I'm just going to ask in English, because everybody here must understand English since they were listening to the talk. Right. So since you've studied many different sign languages in terms of lists, right? So from what I got, is this bias towards the pointing finger, is this a bias that is common in many different sign languages, or is this a bias that is particular to, for example, Libras? Because it's not like a cognitive natural bias for human beings, since hearing people use the pinky finger, so it's not something that is natural, a bias for humans, right? The bias towards the pointing finger. So I don't know, is that common in other sign languages, this bias, or is it somehow related to, I don't know, maybe the kinds of hand configurations that are more common in Libras, for example? This because of a talk that was given in the morning, where this configuration is said to be one of the most common ones. So maybe, I don't know, is it something that is particular to Libras, or is it something that is common in other sign languages as well? Thank you.
There's two things going on there. One of them is the pointing finger, right? So the pointing device, the pointing finger, not the list hand, but the pointing finger. And first of all, no, I have not studied list constructions in a lot of different sign languages. I've done it in Libras, a little bit at ASL, and then this data from Finland Swedish Sign Language. However, there's a good literature out there on lists in other sign languages. And if we're just talking about the pointing hand, what I call the pointing device, yeah, very commonly it is the pointing finger. Now, we've seen that, you can have two pointing fingers, and there are certain other conditions when you can point with various ways. In Iranian Sign Language, my friend says if in certain conditions, maybe if the pointing hand is preoccupied by carrying groceries or something, right, they can point with the thumb. So with a one-handed pointing by using the thumb is But yeah, the pointing finger is very common. Now, the other question was the pinky. Yeah, okay, so starting with the thumb or index is very common across sign languages. Very, very, very common across sign languages. Obviously, in the data we've looked at, which for for hearing people in spoken language, we see it, but the pinky first was pretty predominant. At this point, I don't know. I don't know what is going on there. I don't know. I don't know. Is the honest answer. Listing is a grammatical construction in sign languages, right? And so it has become conventionalized for whatever reason, and probably my inclination would be to say it's for some good reason that I don't quite know yet. It's become conventionalized as this. And I think there certainly is convention going on in hearing people as well, but I think the conventionalization is not quite as frozen, is not quite as conventionalized yet. And we've got, more. But within the same speaker, you didn't see it, you saw it as different clips, but within Adaji, in one talk, he does both pinky first and index first. Is that just some kind of random variation on his part, or my inclination is to think I don't think it is. I think something motivated that difference between starting with his pinky and starting with an index. But with the amount of data we have so far, I don't know. There is something. My inclination would also be to say there's something cognitively going on with here, or articularly going on with starting up here, but starting at the top seems to be articularily, what a hard word to say. It's more articulatory energy to get my hand up there. But I don't know, it's just wild, weird speculation. One more question. Andre lied to me.
Ask you a question. Now it's my time. Thank you, Sherman, for this amazing talk. It's just a quick question. I was wondering about the double pointing like this, and I was wondering why contact is obligatory here and not on the other pointing strategies. Because this is the only one that contact is mandatory if you want to have double pointing. Have you thought about that?
Well, I have an easy answer for you. I have an easy answer. I don't know. Do you have a gut? I think you're right. Andre, he's right. On the others, there can be contact. There doesn't have to be contact. No, that won't work. No, just, I don't know Libras, but I know it's like, no, that's not going to work. No, there has to be double contact. I don't know. I think we see I don't know. Cool, do that. Collect data from all over Brazil, hundreds of different speakers.
Bom, pessoal, tenho duas informações para passar a vocês. A primeira é, a organização da Abralin pede que vocês reutilizem a garrafinha de água nos próximos dias do Congresso. E, além disso, nós avisamos que amanhã a mesa redonda acontecerá no Teatro da Reitoria, o mesmo lugar onde ocorreu a cerimônia de abertura, a partir das 9 da manhã. Tá bem? Então, thank you so much again, Sherman, for this wonderful talk. And now, time for pizza and caipirinha.